Hello, welcome to the first episode of a Sins at Boston Avenue podcast. I am Philip Boone, the Mid-High and Confirmations Director at Boston Avenue, and I am here with Reverend David Wiggs, the Senior Pastor at Boston Avenue. And we are going to talk about the upcoming General Conference. David, can you tell us kind of exactly what General Conference is? How often does General Conference usually meet and all that goes into it?
Sure. So the General Conference is the official body of the United Methodist Church that has decision-making authority. It's the only entity within United Methodism that has the authority to change things in our Book of Discipline, which functions as our guidebook. Typically, they meet every 4 years. The last time they met was 2016. This year, there is coming a special General Conference, which was decided to be set during the 2016 General Conference to deal particularly with the issue of human sexuality. So that's coming up beginning February 23rd, running through February 26th later this month.
Excellent. The General Conference starts this coming Saturday, the 23rd. And what they're talking about is the different plans. They have different plans that the Council of Bishops has come up with, and we're going to talk about each plan as they are. The first plan I want to talk about is the One Church plan, which I believe had about a 2/3 vote.
Correct.
Most of the Council of Bishops wanted to support the One Church plan. Can you tell me exactly what goes into the One Church plan?
Sure. So the Council of Bishops is composed of all the bishops of United Methodism from around the globe. They are the ones that were asked to come up with a way forward, and they set up this 32-member commission that studied all the paragraphs in the Book of Discipline that had to do with sexuality. And out of that commission's work, the One Church plan was the one that got the 2/3 majority vote out of the Council of Bishops. What it attempts to do is allow everyone to remain in the United Methodist Church that is in the United Methodist Church now, despite one's theological or morality opinion in terms of sexuality, particularly dealing with people in the LGBTQ community. And the way this works is that it creates room for everybody. So it removes some of the language which is discriminatory or condemning about homosexuality that's in the current discipline, and opens the door. If a pastor wants to do weddings with same-gender couples, the pastor would have the authority to do that, just as I have the authority now to either do a wedding if a heterosexual couple comes to me or not. I can decide whether or not I want to participate in that wedding. At this point, I'm prohibited from doing that by the discipline for a same-gender couple. But under the One Church plan, it would give the pastor the authority, just like we do for other couples now, for any couple that came. It also would allow the ordination of people who are in the LGBTQ community, which right now there's a prohibition against that in our Book of Discipline. So it would also give local churches the authority to determine if they want to have same-gender weddings on their property and their buildings, in other words. So it opens the door for that. It still allows pastors and churches not to participate in that if they don't want to. So it really leaves room for everyone to stay in the United Methodist Church. So there's sort of this balance between how do we include people, how are we in ministry with all people, and how do we maintain unity or cohesiveness within the United Methodist Church with people who have very definite and differing opinions on how we should proceed.
Would the annual conference be the group that would decide? Would the annual conference have to decide whether an LGBTQ pastor is able to be a pastor at a church?
Right. The way the One Church plan is written now, as I understand it, is it gives the Board of Ordained Ministry, who currently has authority to determine who gets recommended to come into ministry or who is not. It would give them authority to determine how they do that. Now they're prohibited from including someone in the LGBTQ community. This would open the door for them to make determinations despite the sexuality component of that.
Okay. The second plan I want to talk about is a little more confusing. Is
Yes.
The connectional conference plan, which we haven't really heard much about. At least for me, I've heard a lot about the one church plan and a lot about the traditional plan, which we will talk about in a little bit, but very little about the connectional conference plan. Would you be able to give us some gist of what that is?
Sure. So I think you have not heard as much about it because I believe most everyone who's looked at it realizes it becomes so complicated and complex. It requires a whole list of constitutional amendments in terms of how we're structured. Those require every annual conference around the world to vote on those. There has to be 2/3 of the annual conferences who vote in the affirmative to pass that. So it has a 5-year implementation plan. And so with all the constitutional amendments and the timeline, it becomes complicated. The other thing it does is divide the United Methodist Church into 3 different groups based on where you stand with regard to sexual morality, particularly in terms of LGBTQ folks. So the proposal is that there would be a progressive group, a moderate group, and a conservative group, and every pastor and every local church and every annual conference would have to decide who do I want to affiliate with, but all 3 of those would be under the umbrella of the United Methodist Church. There's a provision that says there could be up to 8 different groups, but it becomes complicated by structure, but also the whole idea of dividing the church up around sexuality. The bishops have made clear, and this comes out in the one church plan as well, that sexuality has never been an essential of United Methodist theology, and we should not raise it to that level now, and therefore it should not be the criteria by which we use to divide the church up into groups. So I think it has very little chance of making much progress, and that's why I think we have not heard as much about it. It's more complicated and less likely to be implemented than some of the others.
I think the multiple constitutional amendments, it wouldn't be implemented till 2023. And then what I read is that after that general conference, the 2024 one would actually be moved to 2025.
Oh, well, yeah. I read recently was that it wouldn't be completed till 2025. So that's I don't know what all that sequence is, but that's a long time to be in limbo and transition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you might have mentioned this, but because the annual conference is the group that decides where they will be, which connectional conference they will be a part of. But
right.
As far as I can see, but a local church, if they would like to kind of branch off, they would have to vote on it and be able to go. So you don't have to go to your annual conference.
Right. It wouldn't be restricted by geography the way it is now.
Excellent.
Correct.
Awesome. The next one is the traditional plan, which is kind of self-explanatory in the name. Would you like to be able to explain what's in the traditional and the modified traditional?
Sure. So the group that proposed that were a minority voice coming out of this commission on a way forward that the bishops had set up. The majority was the one church plan, the traditional, which now has been ruled about 40% of the original traditional plan was ruled by the Judicial Council, which is like the Supreme Court for the United Methodist Church. Ruled about 40% of what was written in that plan was unconstitutional. So that's why we now have a modified traditional plan. But at any rate, it maintains the prohibitions against pastors being involved in same-gender weddings, against LGBTQ folks being pastors. It maintains all of that. Plus, it mandates penalties for anybody who violates the discipline, or any church or agency that violates the discipline, for any bishop that violates the discipline. So it's proposing that there's stricter guidelines and sort of mandatory sentences or punishment for people who, because of their conscience, feel like they need to act in a way contrary to the discipline. So it's much more restrictive than we even have now.
Okay. And then the modified traditional plan, they have the gracious exit, where churches are able to leave the Methodist Church, and I believe keep their assets, and not have to, and be able to leave without really any pain or anything going against them.
Right. I think there would be a financial penalty. Okay. In the original traditional plan, it's said that there had to be a group of 50 churches. If you were leaving, you had to be a part of a group of 50 churches. If a whole annual conference voted to leave, then that would be a possibility as well. The proponents of the traditional plan have made it clear that if anyone who doesn't agree with them, they would prefer to leave the denomination. So they've provided this gracious exit as a way to exit those who they believe are dissenters or are incompatible with Christian teaching, basically, is the phrase that's in the discipline that they are building this case on. So any of us who think that way would be asked to exit.
And the traditional plan keeps the language, but kind of strengthens the enforcement if you violate church law.
Correct.
So it makes it it strengthens some of the enforcement. So you get more, it's more enforced. One question I had about, we have one more. We have the simple plan is the last plan. Would you like to explain that plan?
Right. It really is the simplest. The suggestion is that all the discriminatory and condemning language about homosexuality that's in our discipline now simply be removed, and nothing else put in to the discipline about sexuality. The discipline did not used to have any language 40, 50 years ago. We didn't have a language about sexuality. Only since 1972 has that been added. So it goes back to that position. It does, since it takes out the prohibition, it does allow people, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, to be full candidates for ministry and to come into active ministry in the United Methodist Church. Or if there are some of people identify that way who are already in ministry, already ordained and serving, would be able to do that openly, where now they have to do that under the cover of kind of not being open about who they are as people. So it doesn't have an exit plan because there again it leaves room for people to continue to function. It just makes it a more open option for LGBTQ people to get married, serve as pastors, take leadership roles, and be open about that.
And right now, the traditional plan is the only one with any type of an exit.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
One question I had about the one church plan that I was wondering about. For a church to decide that they will have LGBTQ weddings in the church, who decides that? Would it be, or is it different for every church? Would it be a pastor, a board, or who would decide that?
Right. I don't think it would be different for every church. Depending on which legislation gets passed, it could be something like the Board of Trustees, who are responsible for the maintenance of property and supervision of buildings and property now. More likely, I think, it would end up being the administrative board or the official board, depending on how each local church. It's sometimes called Council on Ministries. There's different names that are ones that you can use. The Book of Discipline gives some options about how you organize, but it would be that official body, most likely, that would have to take a vote to determine how the property was going to be used.
And would each pastor be the one to decide whether or not they are going to do same-gender weddings? Is it just up to the pastor?
Yes.
But if if whoever votes not to have it in the building, then the pastor would do it. They would still be able to do it, just someplace else.
Right. So I do weddings now, in people's backyards or at a garden center or different venues. It would be the same that way. The church could decide they did not want to. The pastor would still be free to officiate it, same-gender weddings on other sites.
Okay. Those are the 4 plans. Do you have any lasting thoughts on either plan, or would you like to share anything about that you weren't able to talk about?
Well, it might be interesting to people to know that there's 864 voting delegates, so they represent United Methodists from around the world. They've been elected by their particular region or geographical entity that they're a part of at the conference level, the annual conference level. So it's a simple majority to pass one plan or not. So 433 delegates would make that happen. I was reading recently that the way they're going to conduct the General Conference is that first day of the conference, the 23rd, will be a day of prayer. I'm not sure what all that will include, but a day of prayer and worship. Then the first part of the agenda on the 24th will be a voting process where every delegate has an option of voting high priority or low priority on each of the plans, as well as all the petitions that have come in. There's been over 100 petitions submitted. I read recently that the group that organizes General Conference has deemed that 78 of those petitions are on target in terms of dealing with issues that this General Conference was called for. So the 4 plans, the 78 petitions, they'll do a voting process. Who thinks this is high priority? Who thinks this is low priority? And then after all that voting is done, they will reveal then the percentages of how the delegates voted. The next day, the top vote getters will be given to legislative committees to work on and perfect in a way. So they'll deal with, is it written the way we want it? Do we want to change any wording? Do any of the petitions relate to this particular plan? Then after a day of meeting in legislative committees, the last day of the General Conference, the February 26th date, then we'll see what comes out of those committees that will come to the full body to vote on that last day. So I think we won't know very much in terms of what's actually going to be the legislation that is passed or not passed until the very last day of the General Conference.
And is it just like normal General Conference with half is laity and half is clergy?
Correct. For the most part, it's the same delegates that were elected to represent different groups in 2016. That's true for our delegation in Oklahoma. A few conferences revoted to change their delegations, which they had the option to do. But for the most part, it would be the same delegates, the same people that were together in 2016 that will be back together in 2019 to vote.
Okay. They will be live streaming the General Conference on the United Methodist website. I don't know how much of it they'll live stream. I'm sure the last day they'll be a lot of people will be watching that last day to see exactly how it shakes up. And then there's a chance that nothing will get passed since there's more than 2 plans
right.
And a simple majority has to win.
Correct. So it could be if none of the new plans are passed, then that leaves us with the current language in the discipline, which lots of people have already voiced opposition to or problems with. So that will be, I think there will still be action taken after General Conference, even if nothing passes. I think there'll be individual churches, annual conferences, maybe even whole jurisdictions who make their own declaration about how they're going to proceed, given no changes being made to the discipline. So that could be a turbulent time as well, even if none of the new proposals are passed.
Well, if no change happens, it would basically be the traditional plan, just without the strong enforcements.
True.
So one plan kind of does pass more or less.
Right.
But is there? Because I assume if nothing is passed, they'll probably next General Conference, which is 2020 or 2024, they will go at it again. Because
most certainly,
certainly,
yes. If something doesn't get, if there's not a clear path forward, In terms of inclusion, there will definitely be more discussion and debate forthcoming. Now, the Wesleyan Covenant Association, which is a group that supports the traditional plan and actually helped write it and pushed it and supported it to come through the Commission on the Way Forward, even as a minority voice. My understanding is that they've already set a meeting for April of this year to organize themselves as a new denomination. So if that is true, despite whatever plan passes, we might be seeing a division or an attempt at a departure of some minority percentage of the United Methodist Church to try to establish their own denomination.
So the WCA is going to attempt to leave no matter what.
It appears that way to
even
me.
without the gracious exit in each of them.
It does appear that way to me. I've not been to any of their meetings, so I'm not really on the inside of what is happening there. But it does seem curious that there's already a date set for them to meet to organize as a new entity before the general conference ever actually happens or votes.
Then I would wonder, because if they decide to leave, if the one church plan passes or whatever plan passes, if they decide to leave, then that would make it easier for the future. I mean, is there some place that says that they can have another vote in a certain amount of years? Because if they leave, that'd be easier for the future, I would assume, for the simple plan to pass or for a more progressive plan to pass.
I think you're correct in that assessment. Of course, so this general conference happening this month, February 2019. The next general conference is already scheduled, which would have been the regular every 4-year general conference, is scheduled for May 5 through 15 in Minneapolis, Minnesota in the year 2020. So basically just a little more than a year later, there will be another general conference. At general conference in a normal year, anybody, a layperson, clergy person within the United Methodist Church can submit a petition or a plan for change or a piece of legislation. So I feel sure there will be a good deal of petitions and plans, despite whatever gets voted in 2019, that will come in 2020 in an attempt to begin to further shape how the United Methodist Church moves forward in terms of inclusion of LGBTQ folks.
So basically, no matter which, it's not going away. No matter.
I think it's not going away. And to your point, if some percentage, I have no idea what this percentage would be, but if there's a minority percentage of churches in the more conservative position on this decide to exit or depart the United Methodist denomination, that certainly would move the center of the denomination quite a ways to the left, it would appear, which would, in a sense, create a more open and inclusive denomination in and of itself, despite any legislation that might come forward to make that official in any particular way.
Excellent. Those are the 4 plans. Watch via live stream to see what's going to be happening in the Methodist Church. This was the first episode of Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. This is going to be a every 2 weeks podcast. So the next one will be in a couple of weeks after the decision has been made. We'll explain where Boston Avenue is going from there and what our plan is. So you'll definitely want to catch that one. We are at Boston Avenue at 1301 South Boston Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Thank you, David.
Glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, and we will talk to you guys next time.